Today on the Lazy RPG Talk Show, I'm going to talk about a couple new RPGs that either have hit my desk or are going to hit my desk. Fantasy Grounds has a new free online viewer of your Fantasy Grounds purchase content. D&D Nexus just joins Demiplane. I have new VTT backdrops for patrons today that we're going to take a look at. Do locally hosted applications actually matter that much? We're going to do a little bit of a commentary on that. Vincent Baker has an Ask Me Anything over on Apocalypse World Burned Over. That was really good. I'm going to do the very non-controversial topic of trying to define the OSR. That's going to be a fun thing today. And we're going to talk about your pre-game rituals. What are the things that you do before you're going to run a game that kind of get your head into the space and get you ready to go? I'm going to share some of my own rituals. I'm curious to hear your rituals. I think it'll be really fun topic today. And we're going to cover more from the Sly Flourish Patreon Q&A, more questions from the Q&A, all today on the Lazy RPG Talk Show. I'm your friend, Mike Shea, here to talk about all things in tabletop role-playing games. This past week over on Sly Flourish, I wrote the article Mashing Up the 8 Steps. How can you look at the 8 steps of Lazy GM prep and mix them together a little bit? Maybe you put some steps in another step. Maybe you put your NPCs inside your scenes. Maybe you put monsters inside your scenes. Maybe you put treasure in other parts. You know, how can you kind of mash up the 8 steps that might condense your notes a little bit or make it a little bit easier for you to manage? But where does it fall apart? You can find that on Sly Flourish. This was also emailed out as a email newsletter. Again, you can subscribe to the newsletter for free and a link down below. And over for patrons of Sly Flourish, I did a talk on this. I read the article and also did a little bit of discussion as part of the Readings and Reflections podcast, which is a reward for hero tier subscribers of the Patreon. Next week's article is When and How to Cheat When Running RPGs. Another non-controversial topic. That should be a lot of fun. This one is coming out on Monday. If you are seeing this on YouTube, the article is already up on Sly Flourish. If you subscribe to the newsletter, you will get this article sent to you on Tuesday morning. And if you are a hero tier subscriber to Patreon, you will have an audio version of this as part of the Readings and Reflections podcast, where I will read the article aloud and then dive deep, offer some more thoughts, some more comments, feedback that I received on it and stuff like that. So it should be really, really fun. So that's When and How to Cheat When Running RPGs, a fun topic. So I'm looking forward to that. Last week on the Sly Flourish Patreon, for hero tier subscribers, I released Dread Necropolis. Dread Necropolis is a 6-page adventure location scenario for the City of Arches. You can, of course, reskin it to fit in any sort of thing. It is designed to give you a cool adventure location and some hooks and some ideas for how to use this tier 2, tier 3 level place. So this is for like 5th edition characters that's starting around probably like high, level 7, level 8, all the way to like level 14, level 15. So pretty high level location, set in the City of Arches as a citadel that can teleport from world to world. Different reasons why you might go there. And also part of the Nameless King arc of the campaign arcs of City of Arches. So that was released to patrons last week. If you're a patron of Sly Flourish and you didn't see it, if you're a hero tier subscriber, check out your rewards page. It is the first pinned page actually, it's not the pin page. The pin page is rewards for everybody, but in there is a link that says, hey, if you click this, you get hero tier rewards as well. And it includes not only Dread Necropolis, but also the other 15 adventure scenarios that we have for City of Arches. So really fun, and feedback on it has been great. I had some I had one new RPG that I've been waiting for some time that just hit my table. I am going to do a deeper spotlight later once it's actually available for full purchase. Right now, you can only pre-order it, and that is Dolmenwood, the Dolmenwood Kickstarter. They did very well. I think it was made more than $1 million Kickstarter. And it was one of those, it took a while to kind of hit my desk, right? I got the PDFs a while ago, and I skimmed through the PDFs and I liked what I saw. And there's other people that have been running Dolmenwood campaigns for a while now using those PDFs. But I really wanted to wait until I had the physical version, because looking at the PDFs, I could tell how good the layout was and like how good the product design was. And I really wanted to enjoy that layout and that product design from the physical version. So I've been kind of holding off on even really talking about Dolmenwood because I wanted to see the physical version in hand. And then one day I got a giant box on my doorstep, and I picked it up and almost strained my back. I hurt my back a little bit because it was so heavy. And I brought it in and I opened it up and I started going through it, and I was like, and I had every so often I have this reaction with a Kickstarter, which was, oh my God, how much did I spend on this? what did this cost me, Mike Shea? What did past Mike Shea spend on this? Because I was like, this has got to be like $250. Like I probably spent a good deal. And it turns out it wasn't so bad. I went back and looked and it was $125. And you're like, $125, that's actually, for an RPG, like $125 is pretty expensive, right? Like I just gave a bunch of crap for the Forgotten Realms books being $110 for the 2 books. This is 8 hardcover books. 8 hardcover books, 3 main books, 3 great big books, a player's guide, a monster's guide, and a giant campaign guide, which all came in a big slipcase. And then a map book, hardcover map book that has maps of all the locations that are in there that folds out flat on the table, but it was hardcover. And then 4 digest-sized hardcover adventures for it. It also included a cloth map and a dice bag, which became immediately my new favorite dice bag. I took my old dice bag and put it in the closet, and I took my dice and put it in this new dice bag for my bag of dice that I take with me when I'm on the road. I really, really like the dice bag. And PDFs of all of that stuff. 8 PDFs, or more. I think there was more than 8, but there were at least 8 PDFs for all of those books, right? So 8 PDFs, 8 hardcover books, a dice bag, and a cloth map, and a slipcase for the 3 main books for $125. And then my reaction when I heard that was, somebody lost money, because that was a really, really good deal, right? That was honestly probably too good a deal. I don't know that I made money. And Pixel says you probably made money on it. I don't think I certainly didn't make money on it, but I can tell you the value for what I got was really, really high. So I'm going to dive into Dolmenwood later. My immediate kind of short reaction to it is the product design is absolutely fantastic. The layout and the way things are written from people I know that have run campaigns, the way it is designed to help you run a campaign is fantastic. The system is a little esoteric for me. Other people love this style. It is definitely an old school style system that is built from BX, Dungeons and Dragons BX style rules. So it's got separate saving throws. It has a different way that you do skills. It has a different way that you do ability checks. It has incremental armor class and incremental attack bonuses, which is different than BX, I think. So the game itself, in my opinion, just my opinion, man, the system itself is a little like fidgety. And it's especially when you compare it to games like Shadowdark. And from what I understand, there's actually people that are doing a Shadowdark conversion of Dolmenwood because they like the Shadowdark rules more. And I'm not knocking the rules necessarily, because it might be fun to kind of play this way where you have, 5 separate saving throws that are separated from your ability scores and stuff like that. It sort of kind of gets back to that old school way. And I've talked to people that really like that style a lot. So I'm going to dive into it more. But boy, the design of the campaign, the feeling of it, the art, the physical design of the books are just through the roof. And this is something I've really noticed this past year. Is so many times I've gotten new products on my table that I either backed or I got review copies or something like that, or I went and bought. And I'm like, the product quality is so good, right? The production quality of these books are so good. Land of Eam was amazing, right? The production quality for Land of Eam blew me away. Mothership, the box set for Dragonbane. There's so many of these. Nimble 5e, right? I've gotten a lot of these in this past year. And when I open them, I'm always blown away by just the quality of the materials, the physical quality of the materials and the quality of the art and everything like that, just blowing me away. It really is like the best time for RPGs, right? We get these, the Daggerheart, right? Daggerheart is a gorgeous RPG. The physical design of these books are amazing, right? They're really, really top notch. So that I was really blown away by that with Dolmenwood. So I'm going to do a more deeper dive spotlight on Dolmenwood once you can actually buy it. Right now you can pre-order it on the Dolmenwood site from Exalted Funeral. But once you can actually order it and receive physical copies, at that point, I will talk more about it, because at that point, you can actually do something about it. But it is a very, very cool RPG. The other one that I'm excited for, it hasn't hit my table yet, is 13th Age. So 13th Age version 2, I have the PDFs. I've had the PDFs for a while. They've sent new PDFs out with some updates in them already. I really want to play 13th Age. I have played 13th Age in the past. It's one of my favorite RPGs. I really, really like it. I'm very excited to see the new version of it. And I like Dolmenwood. I have been waiting until I have the physical books in hand before I really dive in. I really want to dive in on the 13th Age books. There's 2 books. There's a player guide and a GM guide. The GM guide includes monsters and everything like that. So I'm very excited to kind of see that. I'm excited for 13th Age to come out. And I think that's supposed to come out before the end of the year. So I think that will be really cool. So those are two new RPGs that have kind of hit my desk recently. And I'm going to talk more about other RPGs. I've got new RPGs that I'm going to start running for my groups. I'm starting to get very excited for a Dragonbane campaign that my Wednesday group is going to play, and a Daggerheart game that my every other week Friday, Saturday game is going to play. So I'm going to be trying out some other games as well, and I'm excited for that. This past week, Fantasy Grounds announced that they have a new online web viewer for the material that you buy on Fantasy Grounds. So this is available on the Fantasy Grounds website. There is a place where you can go for your content. And this is an example of the 5.2 SRD, which everybody has access to. So there's sort of a My Library section. They call this beta. And an example is like if you want the 5.2.1 SRD, everybody gets access to this because that's open and available. It's under Creative Commons. And you can see what it looks like, right? And it's got a good looking interface for material that you buy here. Now, if you buy, for example, the D&D 2024 Player's Handbook, Dungeon Master's Guide, and the 2025 Monster Manual, you could see them in the same compendium as well. So instead of only having access through the material you buy on Fantasy Grounds in the Fantasy Grounds tool, in their thick client application, you can now read the material online in like a mobile-friendly format directly off of their website. At the same time, Fantasy Grounds announced that their client is now free, that their expectation is to make enough from the licensing fees that they charge to companies who are producing material for Fantasy Grounds, that the Fantasy Grounds application itself is now free. I think it used to be like $30, and I don't know if the players had to pay that amount or not, but now nobody does. Nobody has to pay the amount. I downloaded the copy and loaded Fantasy Grounds again because it was free to do, and played around with it a little bit. I'm not a big so I don't spend a lot of time in VTTs at all these days. And when I do, I usually gravitate to things like Owlbear Rodeo, but I'm always curious about them. And I know there are many people who really love Fantasy Grounds. So it's cool that Fantasy Grounds has gone to free to download the client, and also has access to a lot of stuff, including the D&D 2024 Player's Handbook, Dungeon Master's Guide, and 2025 Monster Manual. Those are available in it. And from what I understand, once you download Fantasy Grounds on an application and you install those things, it does not phone home again, which means you don't have to necessarily, as long as you're keeping, and I'm going to talk about this in a little bit, as long as you're keeping your own local copy, you don't have to then phone home again and hope that they still have it. How valuable that is in the long run is a question that we're gonna dive into a little bit. Somebody asked, is this mobile friend truly one column mobile friendly? So far, yes. When I was able to look at it on my phone and it worked. I can't remember if it's this one that I think they have monsters in here. There's the other one that I'm going to talk about is, yeah, they have monsters in here too. And let's see, I will shrink it, although it's going to screw up the thing. But you can see that it's it crushes to a certain level, right? So yeah, mobile friendly, mostly mobile friendly interface. Your results will vary, from what you depending on what kind of phone you got and stuff like that. Anyway, that was really interesting. So it means if you have purchased content on Fantasy Grounds that you want to be able to see on other devices like a phone, you have a way to log in and check out your library and look at that. And that's pretty interesting. Also at the same time, D&D Nexus started up. So D&D, they've got their official branding. D&D Nexus is the official Demiplane view of Dungeons & Dragons material that you have purchased. My understanding is if you purchased the D&D 2024 Player's Handbook, Dungeon Master's Guide, the Monster Manual is not yet available. They're still working on the Monster Manual because I think formatting is tricky. If you bought them for Roll20, you now can view them in the Demiplane application on a mobile device. And that's, in the same way of what I was just talking about with Fantasy Grounds. So again, this is their version of it, right? They're playing the game. Same way that the Fantasy Grounds library works, there is a compendium and you can see same kind of material. This again is system reference document material that they've got here. And you can view, let's see, what else do they have? The other sources that they've got. So this was the SRD. Now I think, so an interesting thing, I actually do own the Player's Handbook and Dungeon Master's Guide, but not on this account. I have two different accounts, right? So I need to somehow join my Demiplane account with my Roll20 account, and then I'd be able to see those in the same place too. So they, and you can see like they've got the brand new Forgotten Realms books are here, right? This is on Demiplane, and so you can view the material here online in that same way. So in the same way that Fantasy Grounds gives you a web-based access, sort of a compendium viewer of the material that you have. So does Nexus. So does Demiplane. So the interesting thing about all this is Demiplane is owned by Roll20 now. Roll20 also owns DriveThruRPG. So you have like one big company that's kind of got all of it. So if you buy your stuff on Roll20, you can view it in Demiplane in a web-based interface. Now, Demiplane was also known to build character builders, but I seriously doubt that they're going to build a D&D 2024 character builder because Roll20 is building a D&D 2024 character builder. They've been working on it for a while, and it is intended to be a mobile-friendly D&D 2024 character builder. And that takes a ton of effort. I don't know that I would expect that they're going to also do one for Demiplane. It wouldn't make sense to do one for Demiplane. So I have a feeling that as far as Demiplane is concerned with viewing Dungeons & Dragons material, it is compendium only. It is not a character builder. So that means we have a bunch of different ways, 3 different ways to view your D&D 2024 content in mobile-friendly web-based formats. Fantasy Grounds, Demiplane, and D&D Beyond. The other one that's kind of sticking out to me is Foundry. So Foundry is a pretty rich virtual tabletop. I would love for there to be some relatively easy way to view my Foundry content in a mobile-friendly format. There's a thing called Mobile Improvements, a plugin called Mobile Improvements for Foundry. The advantage that might have is then you can access your own local Foundry server instead of having to go to a separate website like Demiplane or like Fantasy Grounds. You actually have your web server that you can hit that would let you see your compendium content. So I would be interested in seeing something like that, but Foundry doesn't seem to really drive that way because it's what they call the canvas-based interface, which is essentially you're always in the VTT no matter what you do. But there are some plugins that are getting close. So that's interesting. Now, I have kind of 2 disclaimers on all of this. One disclaimer is that, and some people have asked me, is this kind of like a new candle lighting bright? Does this mean that like we have even better access to our material and that's good? And sure, right? Sure, it's good. We still don't technically own it, right? That when you buy your stuff on Fantasy Grounds and you download it to your Fantasy Grounds client, as long as you're maintaining that client, you own that data. But if you ever move to a new platform and you have to re-download Fantasy Grounds and re-download again, you're still going back to their site. And I think it's still possible, and I bet you'd have to go look at the license agreements to determine that they might still not let you download the thing. Now, how practical that is a different story. We're getting to the practicality on the other side. Same thing with having, like Roll20 is a web-based platform, right? There's no local copy of Roll20. Like if you're using Roll20, you're going to their server. But it's worked for a long time for a lot of people. And a lot of people bought it on Roll20. So as long as you're like, well, I don't, as you recognize the difference between owning a product and buying a limited license to a product, then you're fine. As long as you recognize it's a limited license and things can change and I could lose access later. They could choose to lose access and they can modify stuff. And the modifying of stuff actually does happen, right? There are times where the material underneath the thing you buy changes and you don't get a choice of whether it changes or not. Now, the argument, though, is with Foundry. Foundry's not quite like that. You actually buy the software, you get a license key for the software, you download the software and install it on whatever platform you're going to run it on. And that could be remotely hosted with a hosting provider. It could be your local Raspberry Pi, like mine that's sitting over there. It could be a bunch of different, you could load it on your normal machine and have people get access to your normal machine. And then when you buy stuff like the D&D books for that, it's downloaded to that machine and it's installed that machine and then it runs. So the question, though, really comes down to like the practicality of this. And to me, the question is like, do you expect that you're going to be able to maintain your local instance of this stuff longer than those companies are going to provide them to you? And I'm not sure the answer is yes. I don't know that the answer is that you will be able to maintain your local copy longer than the company will be around. And the example that I'll bring up is Foundry, right? That is it practical that you'll be able to continue to run Foundry if Foundry itself like goes out of business, right? It would be a bad day, but let's say Foundry gets either bought out by somebody or it goes somewhere else and it changes radically. Do you feel like you'll be able to maintain your own local copy of Foundry long enough for that to actually matter? Or is the reality that you're always updating your software from Foundry? Foundry just recently switched from like version 12 to version 13. It meant that a whole bunch of the game worlds also had to migrate from version 12 to version 13. It meant a bunch of the little plugins and modules all have to migrate. Some of them did, some of them didn't. Many of them did, some of them didn't. But all of that required going back to their server and downloading the stuff again, because these are big, complicated software packages. These are not like a PDF or a text file where like you can be pretty confident if you have a PDF of something, you're going to find something that can view that PDF 20 years from now. I feel pretty confident about that, right? PDF as an open format is ubiquitous enough that I bet you if you own a PDF, you can open it 20. I have PDFs that are more than 20 years old that I haven't had to migrate to anything. Virtual tabletops and things like that, though, these are complicated pieces of software. And typically the way that you're going to run them. So I was having this conversation with a friend of mine where I was like, I do a pretty careful job. I don't even use Foundry, but I own it. And I like to own it because it's like my own thing. And it's one of the few ways that you can have the D&D 2024 digital material and actually own it. So I have it that way. But I don't use it, which is weird. Like, why did I bought it with my own money. So why did I spend all that money on that thing I don't use? But that's a separate thing. Anyway, I was like, well, I'm using the Docker-based version of Foundry, which means I've got these Docker instances. And I actually back the Docker instance up pretty regularly. So what I do is I have a working version of Foundry with a working version of the mods that I like, with a working version of the game worlds that I like. And I sort of snapshot that into a Docker. And so now I've got this package that theoretically later I could take that Docker and uncompress it, kind of reinstall it locally without having to talk to anybody else. And I would have a working version of that at that point. But I was like, but what if my software, what if the operating system I'm working on changes, right? I'm running on a Raspberry Pi with their OS right now. What if I change to another Linux-based platform? Would it work on that one? And the answer is probably no. You'd have to rebuild the Docker, right? So that's a problem, right? Because now I have to maintain all of the other infrastructure to even load that Docker. What it means, so this is total nerd talk. I know I've lost a lot of people. I've lost a lot of people in this conversation. I'm sorry about that. But my point is, all of my table pounding about owning the material that we buy digitally, I think that argument falls apart a little bit when we're talking about these richer applications like virtual tabletops. Because I just don't think it's realistic to expect that we're going to be able to maintain our own local instance of a virtual tabletop for like 20 years, right? I still think PDF and text files are really important. If you want to own an RPG product, you really don't own it unless you have a PDF of it. And the PDF is pretty static. You really can't do a lot with the PDF other than read it. And even then, you can't read it really easily on every device, which is another problem I have. But at least you have a digital copy that you can put in an archive. You can stick on your 7.5.2 backup system or your 3.2.1 backup system, if you recall when I lost the other half of the audience a little while ago. Trying to preserve these kinds of things, these online viewers of your material, the virtual tabletops that you're connected to, I don't think the locally hosted version matters quite as much because I don't think the practicality of maintaining this longer than the companies will be around is very high. I think that it's going to be just as hard or harder for us to maintain our own local copies as it would be for the company to just stay up and running all the time. So I don't want to talk about it anymore. But, that thought has been in my mind, that the idea that Foundry is better than the other ones because Foundry is local. Yes, that's true. The practical nature of it, though, is you're still going to be clicking that update button, and that update button's still going to their servers, and some of your stuff is going to break, and some of your stuff is going to work, and you're still dependent upon all those connections still working in the long run to be able to keep your Foundry instance running. Another factor is always consider that nothing is going to beat physical books. Physical books have been proven to last thousands of years. If a well-preserved copy of your role-playing game could last 1,000 years in physical book copy. So that if you really want to have one that you know is going to last, a legacy that you can pass down to your children or pass along in a library when you donate it to some other group, nothing beats physical books when it comes to owning an RPG. Last week, I talked about the Apocalypse World Burned Over Kickstarter that Meg and Vincent Baker have launched. I'm really excited for it. So Vincent Baker did an Ask Me Anything over on Reddit. You can find a link down in the show notes below. I always love this kind of behind-the-scenes sort of thoughts and design ideas from the designers, particularly of one of the most influential role-playing games that has come out in the past 20 years. I think that Apocalypse World and the Powered by the Apocalypse system has radically changed RPGs. It has inspired many RPGs, including the Avatar: The Last Airbender role-playing game. Daggerheart is inspired by it. Blades in the Dark, which also inspired Daggerheart, is there. There's so much interesting stuff that came from the Powered by the Apocalypse system. So it's always, to me, really interesting to hear like what was going on in their minds when they were designing it and what are some of their thoughts now. So there's a really good Ask Me Anything with Vincent Baker on Reddit, and I will link to that down in the show notes. I thought I would do a non-controversial, sometimes I like to kind of, get into like hot topics, but I thought I'd do an easy one today. I thought I would do one that is non-controversial and won't result in me getting a big pile of comments on YouTube or emails that are sent to me telling me I'm wrong. And I thought the topic today would be defining the OSR. How do we define the OSR? An OSR, first of all, we can't even define what OSR stands for. So we have that problem. Is it old school Renaissance? Is it old school revival? Who could say? No one. You get to say it. We each get to say is really the answer to this. But in the talk about like, what does OSR even mean? I thought it would be also useful to kind of like, how do we define different RPGs? Like, what are the things that we can do? Maybe not to categorize RPGs, but to at least define like what makes one RPG different from another. And the value to this as game masters is for us to be able to communicate to one another about games that we're looking at. And also to communicate to our players when we're considering bringing one of these new role-playing games to them, which is something that I'm now doing with multiple groups is, hey, I'd like to bring you an RPG. They might not have heard about it. How do I describe it to them so that they get a good understanding of, that's what this game is like? What are the different kinds of things? So we're going to talk about that today. I have a hard definition of the OSR. This is my clear definition of the OSR. The OSR is what you think it is and what everyone else is wrong about. That's what the OSR is, right? That to me is the OSR. The OSR is what you think it is and what everyone else is wrong about. I will define this. I'm not an OSR guy, right? There are people who define themselves as I'm an old school RPG player, right? I think it's actually not useful to define anybody like that. I think it's far better. Like I'm an RPG guy, right? Like I love role-playing games. I love all role-playing games, right? I love them whether they're old school or new school or tactical or heroic or cinematic or whatever. Storytelling versus, the grid-based, whatever. I love all role-playing games. I love all role-playing games. And I think we are binding ourselves. I think for the people who call themselves old school players, they're defining themselves too narrowly. Right? And they usually are trying to do it to like point at another group and be like, not like those guys over there. And that's where it's like, do we really need to have segments like that in our hobby? Like, why can't we all just love role-playing games and then talk about the games we love and maybe talk about the things that we don't dig? But what I don't really have tolerance for is people saying that version over there is bad. That's a bad role-playing game, right? That's a bad one. Pathfinder 2 is terrible, right? Or Old School Essentials is terrible, or D&D 5e is terrible. Like those are bad systems. This is a good system over here. Like, no, it's not for you. There are plenty of times where games cannot be for you. That doesn't mean they're bad. Particularly if you've heard about it, it's probably good to somebody, right? If you've heard about it, somebody loved it, right? That's my argument. There's probably bad RPGs out there and no one talks about them because they're universally, everyone's like, yeah, I don't like them, right? But I guarantee what I'm looking for in an RPG may not be what you're looking for in an RPG. And that's why I think this conversation is useful. It's like, let's talk about what some of those things are. What are the kind of things that define it? So separation of, old school versus new school games. I love all kinds of games. And here's a list of games that I currently have in my mind that I love. And it's not an inclusive list. This is not everything. I love 5e. I love Daggerheart. I love Dragonbane, Shadow Dark, 13th Age, Shadow the Weird Wizard, Numenera, Dolmenwood. All these games look really cool to me. Mothership. I could go on and on, right? Mothership and Cairn and what else? What was another game? Ironsworn, right? There's all kinds of games that I love. Okay, but when we talk about old school style games, we can go back to Matt Finch's Old School Primer, which I think is, among old school aficionados, many of them point back to this Old School Primer. This was like a short piece that Matt Finch wrote on kind of the principles of old school gaming. And in that document, Matt has 4 criteria for what he considers to be kind of old school style play. And that includes rulings, not rules. The idea that the GM is kind of the final arbiter of the rules, and the rules are really guidelines for the GM to help arbitrate the game. Player skill, not character abilities. that you are testing a player's ability to navigate the environment you're describing to them, not just calling for checks. A good example is like, how do you examine the door in order to determine if it's trapped? Like, what are you doing? What is your character doing in the world to determine that? Versus a passive perception, you have a passive perception of 16. You can tell there's something weird about this door, right? There's something that makes the hair on the back of your neck stand up because of this door, right? You just know it because your character has a thing. That's sort of player skill versus character abilities. Heroic, not super heroic. We're going to get into this a bit, but the idea of like, is your character special among everybody in the world, or are they uniquely built in this world for adventure where everybody else is kind of just living their lives? Or are you pretty much is your character pretty much the same as everybody else? You're just the one who happened to pick up a sword and go into a cave instead of stayed home as a farmer, right? So that's kind of heroic versus super heroic. I actually think I have more refined definitions of this that I'll get into. And then forget balance, a world that doesn't conform to the characters. The idea is that when you're navigating the world itself has dangers of various levels, and it doesn't conform to what level you are. Right. This is the conversation my friend Teos and I have all the time. Does the rope's DC change with the level of the character trying to climb the rope? I argue no. And there's different ways to play it. And what's interesting is you can actually use these in lots of different RPGs, including modern ones like D&D 2024. You can put a lot of this stuff into D&D 2024, even though you have stuff like passive perception, and even though you have a lot of super heroic activities. I still do a lot of old school stuff, like talking about what the positioning is when you're navigating in a dungeon or how you handle lighting. I still have worlds where they don't necessarily conform to the level of the character. Sometimes they face guys that are really, really easy. So there's lots of things we can do there to run them. Now, I think there's some other things that I see commonly tied to old school style games. And people bring these up. One of them is that often they are heavily randomly generated, that in order to keep that world being free, the GM is assumed to not have a heavy hand in what kind of encounters are going on. And instead, there's more of a focus on random encounters or random numbers of monsters in an encounter. There's less like defined focused scene and more of the world is this random procedurally generated world as you're navigating it. Obviously, you can go back and forth. There are different degrees of this. This is where all the comments are going to come in. The GM, typically in an old school style game, the GM doesn't change things once they're established. So even before they've hit the table. So once the GM has kind of determined that things are there, the GM's not really there to change things based on what has already happened in the rest of the game. The intention, that guy's going to be in that room because he was supposed to be in that room. So there's a feeling that the GM shouldn't be putting their thumb on the scale to change things depending on things like beats. Obviously, if you've heard me talking about upward and downward beats, the dials of monster difficulty and things like that, I am one who feels that it is our duty, it is our obligation to ensure that the game is fun. And sometimes in order to keep the game fun, we turn the dial to make it harder, or we turn the dial to make it easier, and easier like higher threat, lower threat, upward beats and downward beats. I really feel like it's okay to do that kind of stuff. Many people disagree. Oh my God, now you're just making things up. That was one of my favorite arguments. Like, we're still making things up. This is a big one. And this is one that I don't think we talk about a lot, which is, to me, in games that are more lethal, there is a separation between the player and the character, more so than your character-focused games. So if you think about like D&D 2024, D&D 5e, games like Daggerheart, you are really tied closely to your character. There's an intention that your character is going to have an arc. You're following that arc. You and your character are really, really tightly tied together. But in games where you're dying a lot, the player is not so much being the character as managing the character. Right? There's a separation between the player and the character. And you want that separation if you're going to be going through a lot of characters. If you're too deeply involved in your character and then they get killed by a poison dart trap, you're going to feel really bad. But if you're like, oh, well, now's my opportunity to roll up another character, it's a different circumstance. And I think there's some ways that we can do this in a lot of games, like having the players tied to an organization or a faction instead of their characters, so that they can kind of bring characters in and out from the faction. And then the player's really part of character management instead of being the character themselves. The first place I really noticed something like this was the video game called Darkest Dungeon. Darkest Dungeon is this really kind of brutal roguelike role-playing game where you run characters through dungeons and get more powerful and earn stuff, but sometimes your mind shatters from the horrors that you see, and you gain all of these weird traits, and sometimes you have to be just retired or kicked out of the town because you're not useful anymore. There's a moment in Darkest Dungeon when you realize that you are not the characters. You are the manager of those characters. I think they call you the caretaker or something like that. And you are essentially, you're the one hiring the adventurers to go do the thing. And that way, when you feel that way, now you're just in management, right? And you're cold and calculating manager of resources, not the person who loves these characters. And I think that's kind of an old school sort of idea that isn't really talked about a lot. Often in old school games, avoiding combat is often the right move. There's a big talk about like, hey, sometimes you just shouldn't have a fight. And that can be really different from games like D&D 5e, where combat is such a big part of it. You want those fights, right? Everyone wants them. The player wants them. The GM wants them. That's a big part of the game. For me, this is a hard switch. That idea that like, don't you want to swing your sword once in a while? And the idea is, well, you will end up there, but that shouldn't be how that should be a last resort. Often in old school games, character death happens more often. This gets into that character management. And you don't want to have an established character arc. You might have a character arc, but the arc is what's happened in the past. It's not your definition of what's going to happen in the future for your character, because being killed by a dart trap, it could be the arc for your character. Often resource management matters more. Things like food and inventory slots are you pay more attention to those in old school games. Lighting matters. Can you see? Obviously, Shadowdark is the biggest example where there's a big focus on light. Magic is limited. You don't typically see cantrips where you can just do them all the time. You're casting spells all the time. Typically don't see that in more old school style games. And often the characters are kind of the same as the NPCs that are around them, right? The characters are not these like super heroic characters where when they go into town, everybody's like, oh, these guys, right? Unless you've built up to that because of the things you've done. You don't generally start out that way. So how do we define that if we look at new style games? One of the reasons I think that even defining old school and new school is kind of a useless enterprise is because I don't think old school games these days actually play like old school games did. I think that there's a lot of sort of looking back on the past with rose-colored glasses about what games were like back then. But I don't think they actually played like that. And it's like second edition. Second edition had all kinds of Munchkin stuff going on in it, especially when you had the complete books. And you could argue that like lots of people didn't play that way. Like the whole idea of playing it old school, lots of people didn't play it that way back then. So I think calling it old school doesn't even really work because A, we now have so many new games that have this style of play. And also, I'm not sure the old games really met a lot of these criteria either. But if we're going to go through this old school and new school, we're going to talk about this. So some of the new style RPGs, a big focus on the character and the arc of the character. The expectation isn't that you're going to die all the time, but that your character is actually going to go through a longer arc. Maybe they do die, right? But they aren't expected to die. The death is something that can happen in the story anyway. But that's not necessarily the expectation. If you go into Shadowdark, expecting not to die, you're probably going to be disappointed because you're probably going to die. A lot of times. Often things like food and inventory management are hand-waved, right? The minute you get something like good berries, you don't have to worry about food anymore. The minute you can cast a light cantrip, you don't care about lighting anymore. The minute you have a bag of holding, you don't care about carrying stuff anymore, right? There's so many, like pretty quickly, especially in like something, if we think about 5e, you get to the point where a lot of these things that matter a lot in some games don't matter at all in others. And the example is like Shadowdark, right? Like we played Shadowdark for an entire campaign and lighting always mattered. And then in the first episode of our Tales of the Valiant game, we got a common magic item stone that could cast a light cantrip at will. And they were like, that thing would be priceless in Shadowdark. And here we don't even really care, right? And it was like that one magic item shows the vast difference between these two games. Magic is often common and often takes no resources, like cantrips. Again, the light cantrip, right, takes no resources. Characters are often different from the NPCs around them. They come in, they are built differently, they have different abilities right up front. They are not your farmer with a stick. They've often already had a past. They've already had a background, but now they are something new. They come in, they're really different. And I would say in these cases, GMs have their hands on the dials, right? They're doing encounter building, right? They are balancing encounters. They're setting up boss fights. They're coming up with arcs and they're defining that. That is definitely different than how it works. So then let's talk about some of the definitions here, right? And I have some kind of definitions that I've been trying to use to help sort of separate these things out, but then they've sort of fallen apart. And my idea was if we were going to sort of define into two groups, if you have old school and new school, what would I define them as? And I would say you have like super heroic, character-focused, character testing, high fantasy RPGs is one realm. And examples of these super heroic, character-focused, character testing, high fantasy RPGs are games like 5e, Daggerheart, 13th Age, Numenera, Pathfinder, and I would argue 3rd and 4th edition of D&D, right? If you can fly at 5th level, you're pretty super heroic. You're like a superhero, right? Like if 5th level characters in these games have abilities that look a lot like superheroes, throwing around lightning bolts. But even imagine the prestidigitation cantrip, right? If you could do that in real life, you would be a superhero, right? You could do dry cleaning forever for free and make infinite money just cleaning clothes by pointing your fingers at it, right? That's kind of super heroic, right? Character focused, meaning that you're really focused on your character and what they can do and the mechanics they have, more so than player testing. Character testing, that idea that you are testing the characters and their capabilities to manage stuff, more so than you're asking the players what they do. And high fantasy RPGs are sort of like the world is kind of very big in scope and scale. As opposed to the more what I would call, if we're going to define old school, folk heroic is a term that I'm using. Folk heroic, to me, the idea is that you and the NPCs are kind of the same. You're the one farmer who decided to pick up a sword, where everybody else is remaining farmers. Folk heroic, world-focused, player testing, low fantasy RPG. So folk heroic is you are not really different from the people around you, except you're the one courageous enough to pick up a sword and go in a cave, or stupid enough to pick up a sword and go in a cave. World-focused means there is less of a focus on the character and the character's capabilities and more on their interaction with the world. You're talking to the player and the players are interacting with the world through your discussions, more so than just the abilities that the character has. Player testing means you are asking the player, what do you do to check the door for traps? If they describe it a certain way, they get some outcome. If they describe it another way, they get another. And a lot of times you're not rolling. Right? The player testing is different. And low fantasy means not everybody has prestidigitation or the ability to fly. Your characters may get that, but you're going to be pretty unique in the world, right? So that's that kind of low fantasy setting. And examples of those kinds of games are Shadowdark, Cairn, Old School Essentials, BX, AD&D, a little bit of second edition up until you had the complete books. Those are really those kind of low books. But then now that we get to a tricky bit, I'm really into the game Dragonbane right now. I've been playing Dragonbane solo. I love the product. I'm excited to bring it to my Wednesday group. I want to run a short campaign with my Wednesday group doing Dragonbane. And I don't know where Dragonbane falls in this category. And some people refer to Dragonbane because its history goes way back, right? It's 40-year history on Dragonbane. Is it an old school game or not? And, and if we go back to those 4 definitions of old school gaming, rulings, not rules, I don't know, there's a lot of rules going on in Dragonbane. Player skill, not character abilities. Dragonbane has tons of character skills, and you're continually rolling on those character skills all throughout the game. Heroic, not super heroic, it's got feats and things like that, right? It's got some character abilities that are definitely knocking you up, and your character operates differently than the people around it. The balance idea, definitely Dragonbane falls into this, that the world doesn't balance because there's really no balance in Dragonbane, right? The monsters don't have a level or a challenge rating or anything like that. And characters don't even have a level. But a lot of these things like Dragonbane operates differently. So then my question is, instead of trying to build a category and defining the category, what if instead we have tags, right? And we apply tags to games and say, this game has these certain tags. This other game has these certain tags. And that way, instead of trying to group them into groups, we are instead saying with each one of these games, we can define it with a handful of basic things that define that game. A non-exhaustive list. Character skill-based would be an example. Is this player skill-based or character skill-based, right? Does a game depend more on the character skills? Dragonbane is a character skill-based game. It's got a huge list of skills, right? Is it deadly or not? So 5e would be like, nah, it is early on, but later on, it's not quite as deadly. Other games are brutally deadly. And I would say Dragonbane definitely is on the deadly category. Is the world built around the characters or not, right? Is it a character-focused game or a world-focused game? So I would say that games like Daggerheart are character-focused games. I would say 5e is a character-focused game. I would say games like Dragonbane are more world-focused games, right? Randomly generated. So Scipio, help me with this. Does procedural mean randomly generated? Are those two the same thing, kind of? Is there a big focus on randomly generating parts of your world? Are you randomly generating the encounters that you have, the lands that you go to, the discoveries in theirs? There's a lot of sort of like randomly generated things. Procedural worlds, as we talked about. Like, is there a process for walking through the steps of the game? Is there, are you kind of building the world out like as the characters navigate it, or do you have like this refined story? A story-focused game, very different, right? Story-focused games, you have this plan. And again, you can think about like, Daggerheart versus Dragonbane. Or, I like Daggerheart versus Shadowdark as really good, like, differentiating. Daggerheart is character-focused. It is story-focused. It is super heroic. I would argue that it's not as deadly. It is not as randomly generated. It has, high narrative control. And then Shadowdark is highly randomly generated, deadly. It is world-focused. It is player testing, right? You have all these kind of different terms that you can use. One of them is the narrative control. Like, who's got narrative control? High narrative control by both GMs and players. Is that something you find? Again, Blades in the Dark, high narrative control by both players and GMs. Here's one that I kind of like, which is folk fantasy, heroic fantasy, and super heroic fantasy. I think I like the term folk fantasy. Folk fantasy to me means that the characters in the world are very realistic. Again, the farmer who decided to pick up a sword to go into the cave. Magic is rare. There's a focus on small, local challenges, right? My cow got a weird disease after wandering off into this strange part of the forest and ate the wrong thing. I need you to help me with that. More so than like heroic fantasy, which I would say like 5e is definitely more of a heroic and then leads into super heroic fantasy, where the characters are really different. The situations are bigger in scale, right? Regional issues more so than local issues. And then it gets very quickly into super heroic fantasy with some of them. Games like 4th edition and 13th Age and Numenera, I would argue, start with super heroic fantasy, right? These are already over the top. You already have capabilities that go way beyond what normal people can do. And you start that way. You are, in 13th Age in particular, you have a one unique thing. Your character has something that makes you unique in the world. You're already special, right? You're already super special. So that idea of like folk fantasy, heroic fantasy, and super heroic fantasy, I think are kind of useful tags to kind of apply to a game. And again, going back to Dragonbane, where does Dragonbane fit? And I would say Dragonbane fits into that folk fantasy, maybe a little bit into the heroic fantasy, but it feels more folk fantasy to me, right? Player testing. Is this player testing or is this character testing? We had a lot of discussion about this in the Discord server. I don't really consider player testing to be, system mastery. That player testing is not your ability to build a really effective character. Player testing means me as the GM is testing the players with their knowledge and understanding about what's going on in the world. Again, the example of checking for a trapped door. In Dragonbane, you roll a check to see if you can figure out if it's trapped. There's an alertness thing, and you roll that alertness thing. In games like Shadowdark, you don't. In games like Shadowdark, you describe how you're going to try to find out if there's a trap, right? That's that player testing versus character testing. Is it mechanics light or mechanics heavy? Some games are really mechanics heavy, right? We know them. Pathfinder 2, 5th edition. I would argue D&D 2024 is a very mechanics heavy game. Lots of them. I would say Daggerheart is a mechanics heavy game. And they're not bad, right? And if you notice, none of these tags are saying what's good or bad about something. You get to decide whether or not you like some of these things or not. And we're looking for tags that define something, not judge it. Tactical versus narrative, right? And this is one of like, how does combat work? Do you have a narrative combat structure? Are you using abstract distances, or are you using very fixed focus distances with an expectation of the grid? Draw steel, very different from Cairn, right? And Shadowdark and other ones that use abstract distances. Is it crunchy or is it light? This kind of gets in the mechanics light versus mechanics heavy. Are you doing a lot of like the crunchy bits, or you're not doing them? So this is just some ideas about what these tags would be. I'm not trying to define a taxonomy. I'm not trying to create a new ontology that the entire RPG industry will suddenly get onto and we'll make it an IEEE standard. I don't expect that to be the case. I'm trying to get some thoughts together for myself, and maybe you can give me some thoughts too, about what are the things that we can define so that we can look at a game and we can define it with a certain categories so that we can understand it. And when we explain it to our players, if we're going to bring it to them, they can understand it. So let's try it with Dragonbane. What is Dragonbane? I would argue, and this is kind of how I would define it for my players. Dragonbane is a folk heroic fantasy. You're there with villagers doing villager kind of stuff. You're the ones that picked up a sword. It is skill-based, and more character testing because you have a long list of skills and you're rolling the checks on those skills. It is a dangerous game, right? It's definitely high risk. It is world focused more than character focused. So less about worrying about the overall larger character arcs and more interested in like your interaction with the world and what's going on there. The world will not conform to the characters. Like character power and world power are independent of one another. I would argue mechanic wise, it's like a mid-lightweight game, right? I would say that it is not I would say it's a mechanics light game, but it's not super light, so mid-lightweight mechanics game, right? Because you have like roll 20, roll under, and you have a lot of skills, but it's pretty quick to build characters and things like that. So does that work? I think so. Like if I told you that, would you be like, okay, I understand what is going on with Dragonbane? I hope so, but probably more likely it's like, let me show you the character sheet and let me explain some things like D20 roll under, right? That makes more sense. If I say it's a D20 roll under game, and a lot of time that core mechanic is really like, this is a D20 game, or it's a D20 roll under game, or it's a percentile roll under skill-based game, right? You get more ideas about what's thing. But if you say it's a mechanics light D20 game, that gives you kind of a better idea of what's going on. But I think that those tags can work. But again, if you take nothing else from this, the one thing I would take is that instead of trying to define yourself by wearing a shirt around one style of RPGs, instead be a fan of all RPGs. Be a fan of this hobby overall. And then try to figure out how you can define the styles of games that you enjoy and the style of games you don't in a non-judgmental way, using non-judgmental tags of things so that you can explain to your players and to other people in the conversation about what are the kinds of things that you like and the kind of games you like to run, what are the things that you don't, and what are some of the kind of terms that can help better define all of these massive and awesome role-playing games that we have. What are your pre-game rituals? What are the things you do? What are your little habits that you do to kind of get yourself centered and in the mood and ready to run role-playing games for your friends? Whether you're playing games online or you're playing games in person, what are those little things that you do that kind of just recenter yourself and reset yourself and get you ready to play games? I have a few. So I have a game. I'm actually running a game in about an hour. And my little Twitch show that I do on Sunday mornings is an example of my ritual. I've got a ritual that I do every Sunday morning where I get everything ready and I sit and I do my game prep on Twitch so that we can all enjoy going through the prep. It limits it because I only have so much time, so I know that I can get my prep done, but that is a fun little ritual. I like listening to podcasts when I'm setting up Dwarven Forge setups for my game. That's a lot of fun. I have a little TV tray, a little end table, a little collapsible end table that I like to set up next to my dining room table so that I have my own little side piece. When I set up that end table usually about an hour before my game, and that's once I have that set up, I know I'm getting ready. I like getting out my little book stand. I've got a little book easel with little clips on it that hold the pages in place and a little light that I can put on it so it shines a nice bright light and makes it really easy for me to read. When I set up my book stand and my light, I know I'm getting ready to run some adventures. I love setting up my Chessex mat, right? I've got my newfound fan of Chessex mats, and I love rolling that fan out. When I go to my friend's place to play, which I'll be doing in a little bit, I like to get my Chessex mat and put that out, and that's really fun. I got permission from Bruce W. to show him. That is his official RPG apron, like a workshop apron that he wears. And he showed that picture a while ago. And I was like, dude, I love your workshop apron with the D20s on it, right? It's got like a clip. Is that a pocket watch? I don't know what's going on there. And I'm like, man, that's awesome. You're ready to get to work, right? You've got your workshop apron on and you're ready to start building worlds. And I just love that idea so much, right? And, everyone's like, oh, I love that. I got to get one of those. Now everybody wants to wear the apron. So, that is a good example of like getting yourself ready, right? Getting out the chips. When my wife Michelle puts out all the chips on the kitchen table so that people can go and get their snacks. The food order. One of our rituals is the food order, right? And we have one guy who's really good at putting the food order together. And we all joke that when he's not there, everyone's going to starve to death because nobody understands exactly how to order food. And everybody's just chaos and running around, because he's the guy that knows how to manage the food order. And then a ritual, of course, of like, who wants to describe what happened in last session's game, which is something that I like to start my game off with to get people started to talk, to think about what happened in the game. And so I can hear the kinds of things they remembered. I'm usually met with a dead silent stare, but then eventually somebody usually goes in. So what are your rituals? What are the things you like to do that sort of get yourself ready for the game? I want to hear about them. Leave comments, send me emails, tell me about your rituals. I love to hear about the kind of rituals, and what are the good things about these rituals? Why does it help us? It helps us bound our game, right? When we have rituals, particularly like, what are the materials I have to get out to run the game? What are the things that I have to go through? What are my rituals for doing the prep for the game? When you have like steps that you follow to get ready, you've bounded things. Like, once I have these things ready, I'm ready to go because I've done it this way before. I have the things I want. We feel more confident in what we're about to do, and that works really well. They're fun for us and our friends. I saw a wonderful video this past week, which was, and you can imagine that I was really excited about this, which was using real cult-like tactics to improve your D&D group. I don't know about the morality of using actual real-world cult tactics as part of your RPG, but if it's going to get your players to the table more regularly, I'm not so sure I'm against it. Really fun video. I will link to this down in the show notes so you can watch this video about how to use cult-like tactics to get more people at your game. Then I also saw this one and go, oh my God, was Jack Chick right in his Dark Dungeons track? Is this really? What about Blackleaf? Oh no, turns out Blackleaf was right all along. But hey, whatever. A lot of what those cult-like tactics are little rituals that we do. What are the things we wear? What are the things we say? What are the things we set up? What's the vocabulary used? All these rituals that, in my opinion, help bind us together with our friends, help get us together around the table so that we can enjoy some fine fiction and a few laughs and a good time and help escape from the other things that are going on in life and the world around us. I think it's really good. They get us in the mood to play games. Even our pets know what's going on. My cats know when D&D night is happening, right? When I'm getting ready to have friends over, we have separate chairs. We have 2 extra chairs. And Michelle sets up a chair for Maliki, our cat, who likes to go sit on the chair and watch us play. Now, the irony is anybody that goes up to get the chips from the other ritual, the cat will jump on their chair and then stares at the table to looking like she wants to play too. So even our pets know of the rituals that are going on. There's some concerns with rituals too, though, that I think that we want to keep in mind. And one of them is, if they go wrong, we feel out of sync. If we get too bound to our rituals and then we lose our lucky pen or we can't find our apron, is that going to hose up our ability to run our game? If we get too tightly bound to our rituals, we need some flexibility too. We need to be ready that sometimes we just forgot the Chessex mat at home and we're going to have to do it with a sheet of paper. So some flexibility, I think, is really important too, right? Having some ability to let the rituals go and still run our games, I think, can be important. We don't want to have it that if our rituals break down, we have to cancel our game. Right? That's bad, right? If we run into a situation where because we couldn't fulfill our ritual, I heard about this with writing, that sometimes people have writing rituals and like, oh my God, I don't have my lucky pen, I can't write. No, you better just learn how to write even if you don't have your lucky pen. Go down to the dog track, pick up a pencil, and you can still write. Right? You can still write if you don't have your lucky pen. You can still run your game even if your dog took your favorite plushie, right? Your lucky plushie that you keep next to you. Your Cthulhu plushie. I've got a Cthulhu plushie right here. Right, here's my Cthulhu. Right? If you don't have your lucky Cthulhu plushie, and you're like, I can't run my game. I don't know where my thing is. Wasn't that in Goodfellas, right? I need my lucky hat. She's smuggling dope, right? And she's like, I need my lucky hat. I can't do it without it, right? So that, you don't want to need your lucky hat. You want to be ready to do it. Either way, thinking about your rituals, maybe building up some new rituals, considering the rituals that help you get started to prep and run your games, I think can be really good. You can use your habits. You can use these rituals to get past your creative paralysis. The creative paralysis, a lot of times we feel, the fear we feel about performance in front of our friends. We're worried about, oh God, I'm going to forget the names. You can always worry about that. The rituals help us get past that so that we can run awesome games for our friends. Every quarter on the Sly Flourish Patreon, we have the Patreon Q&A. Every month, patrons of Sly Flourish can ask an RPG-related question. Every week, I go through all of the questions that have come up over the past week, and then some of those questions I bring here so we can talk about them on the show. Eric F. says, I watch your prep sessions, and it looks like you usually just kind of brainstorm your way through it, thinking of different ideas as you go. It doesn't seem like you're much of a random table guy. I'm wondering if you have ever tried to make up an in-session almost entirely using random tables. A separate but related question, I agree with you that creating secrets and clues for each session is one of the most valuable things you can do for prep. I come up with enough secrets to fill a D12 table. I also make a random dungeon encounter table and random wilderness encounter tables for each. Do you think that's a waste of time? Have you ever thought it valuable to create encounter tables per session? That's like 25 questions, but I'm going to answer a few of these. I will answer a few of these anyway. So I actually do use random tables a lot, and I use them a lot for things like monuments. And if you watch my prep, you will see there are times where I have the characters going from place to place, and I will roll a random list of monuments that kind of give me some prompts and ideas for locations the characters might explore. A big one that I use often is a random faction list, which has like all of the major factions for the game, for the campaign I'm running, and I will roll on that to flavor things like magic items or NPCs or monuments or locations and other things like that. Random treasure. I'm a huge random treasure guy. I use random treasure almost every time. I hardly ever roll or consider treasure without starting with random treasure. And I did this for the Lazy DM's Companion. I know I did it once, and I may have done it multiple times, where I took all of the tables from the Lazy DM's Companion and I rolled up entire adventures from that. A lot of the reason why you don't see me doing a lot of like completely randomly generated adventures is because my campaigns go for a long time, and I usually have an idea of what's next. So I don't usually have to roll an entire random adventure, but many times I will roll for like the location they're going to or the kind of quest that they might have. So there's lots of areas where randomness slides into my prep. So I do use randomness quite a bit. But as far as entirely generating random events, not usually, because usually I know where they're going to go because of the campaign that we're running, or I have ideas about where they're going to go for the campaign we're running. So no, I definitely use them. I think having a D12 of the secrets sounds fine, right? To me, 10 secrets is usually enough. If you want to do 12, you could do 12. The question is, are you using them all? At the end of it, do you find like it was valuable to make all of those things? Or do you find that you were throwing a bunch of them away, or that they really didn't hit the table? Again, this is one where if you're running an ongoing campaign, I think if you're bringing old secrets forward again, that's pretty efficient. So that can work. Random encounter tables, I think can work. I would probably not do more than like 6 to 8 encounters on them though, right? I wouldn't do a lot of them. Don't build out these like giant D100 random encounter tables, because you ask yourself how many times you're actually going to use it. And if the answer is you're only going to use it like 2 or 3 or 4 times, you don't need a lot of things on there. You can have 6 and you just start scratching them off after you've used them. So I do put together and use random encounter tables for my games. Not every time, but sometimes. And a lot of times if I'm just listing the monsters that might be in a location, I'll just put a number next to them. And that way I've got a little bit of a random encounter table I can roll on to decide. But I never usually do more than like 6. 6 is pretty good, right? Having 6 items for a random encounter, I think that is good. Now, the last thing of like, do you think it's a waste of time? I don't get to tell you what's a waste of your time. You get to define for yourself what's valuable for your time. I have things where I'm like, do you really want to do that? Do you really want to spend 4 hours on the dynamic lighting for that one map? Is that really a good use? Or are there other things you could do with that 4 hours that's going to make your game more fun? I will prompt you. I will challenge you. But if your answer is no, man, my group really loves that dynamic lighting and it would really suck if I didn't have it, so it's worth the time to do it. Okay, great. I don't get to tell you it's not worth the time. If it's worth the time to you and it's worth the time to your group, then it's worth the time. So I think a valuable thing to do is to look at what you're prepping and ask yourself, did I get the value from that prep that I wanted? And if not, how can I change things slightly in order to make my prep work a little bit better for me next time? Right? This idea of like, do your prep, run your prep, review what you prepped, and then do your prep again with that new knowledge, right? I think that's a really effective way of doing your prep. It's something that I do often. It's ways that I'm constantly trying new things out, figuring out things that work well for me, figuring out things that that don't work well for me. I think that works really well. So I hope I answered your 25 questions. I think I did. June M says, do you think Stranger Things Welcome to the Hellfire Club can work equally well as a good entry point, but for Stranger Things fans rather than board gamers? 2 years ago at summer camp, I offered to run a D&D game for beginners, and the only reason some of them joined was because they were Stranger Things fans. They've been playing and loving D&D ever since. From my own experience, Stranger Things can be an incredible motivation for new people to try D&D. Do you think the Hellfire Club box set can really capture the magic and bring those fans into the hobby? I'd love to see you make a similar review video about the Hellfire Club box, but from the angle of how well it introduces Stranger Things fans to role-playing and whether it can truly draw them in. So, disclaimer, I received a review copy of the Welcome to the Hellfire Club box set from Wizards of the Coast. They sent it to me. I dove into it. I read it. I really liked it. I haven't gotten around doing a spotlight on it, though. But I do dig it a lot. I think it is a really good box set. And there are arguments that it is a better starter set than the new D&D basic starter set that came, or the new D&D starter set that came out. I'm not sure I'm ready to say that, but it certainly feels more like D&D to me than that did. It clearly has a big focus on Stranger Things. So I would not run it if you are not a Stranger Things fan. If you are a Stranger Things fan, I absolutely think this is a fantastic way to bring people into the game. If you and your friends are fans of Stranger Things, there's a lot of Stranger Things going on in that box. It is a really good box set. It's got a ton of material, a lot of maps, good rule books, tokens and pawns. It's a really good box set that includes a lot of really good material. The adventures I thought were also pretty straightforward. I've had friends where we're like, some people like the adventures, some don't. I think this is the problem with all adventures. You're always going to find people that love them and other people that don't. So I think you can absolutely use the Stranger Things box set to bring more people into D&D. I think Wizards of the Coast knows this too. They would not have put nearly as much energy and effort into doing this box. And the really good thing is they put it out early. So the new Stranger Things season, I think, is coming out in 2 weeks, right? They're starting it for 2 weeks and it's going through the end of the year. And the box set's already out there. In fact, I think over at like Target and Walmart's, they have like end caps of Stranger Things related stuff, and the D&D Stranger Things box is one of the things on that list. They somehow got into that distribution thing. And I don't think the D&D starter set has gotten into that distribution yet. So I think this could be a great way to bring new people in the hobby. And it might end up being, certainly right now, for the next few months, I think it might be the strongest way for new people to find the RPG hobby. And from that alone, that could be a really valuable thing. So I give it a thumbs up. I think that the Stranger Things box set is really good. And I think it absolutely can be a great way to introduce new people into the game. Friends, I want to thank all of you for hanging out with me today while we talked about all things in tabletop role-playing games. I hope you enjoyed today's show. If you did, the best way to stay on top of all of the things that I do is to subscribe to the Sly Flourish newsletter. There is a link down in the show notes. You get a free adventure generator for signing up, and you get a RPG-related email sent to your inbox every week. You can also support me directly on Patreon. Patrons get access to all kinds of tips, tricks, tools, the Patreon Q&A, scenarios like the Dread Necropolis, lots of things that you get for being a patron of Sly Flourish. You also get to join our awesome, dedicated Sly Flourish Discord community where we talk about role-playing games all week long, and you help me put on shows like this. And you can pick up my books, including City of Arches, Lazy DM's Companion, Return to the Lazy Dungeon Master, and more at the Sly Flourish bookstore. Links for all of those are in the show notes. Thank you so much. Have a great day, and get out there and play an RPG.